you already know how to regulate your nervous system. You've done breath work, you've read books, and you could probably even name your triggers out loud. Yet somehow, under pressure, on the wrong day, in the wrong room, you end up acting like the same person you were 5 years ago. And I want to sit with you for a second because most people just want to rush past it. It's not necessarily that you haven't done the work effectively. It's essentially that you've just been working on the right thing, the right problem, but the wrong layer of it. Here's what I mean. Regulating your nervous system is essentially like turning the volume down on the radio. It genuinely helps. Your head might feel clearer, your body feels calmer, but the thing is you're still attuned to the same station. So essentially, something built that station long before you ever needed to turn that dial. So today, I don't want to give you another technique, not another tapping exercise, another breath work run through, but essentially helping you understand what essentially built the station in the first place. And I think that once you see it, a few things about yourself are going to make a little more sense. Think about the car that you grew up riding in, not the current car, but the actual car that you grew up in. Someone had already preset the radio station that you'd be listening to. So every time you get in, you would attune to that radio station. You would listen to that. And so at some point in time, it wasn't even a conscious habit. You'd get into the car, you'd put the radio on whatever frequency that you would listen to, and that was it. That's the station that you would plug yourself in because that was the norm. And essentially, you were not choosing the station anymore. The station had already been chosen for you. And your nervous system got its presets in the same way. And this happens earlier than one would guess. Before you could even talk, before you had a single rational thought about your current circumstances. This wiring essentially decides whether you feel safe or unsafe, walking into a room, or if conflict registers as dangerous or just uncomfortable, whether slowing down feels like rest or falling behind. Most of that was set in the first several years of life. And this was all done in a brain that was recording everything as absolute truth. There were no questions to question any of it. Which means, have you ever wondered why a healthy adult with a good job, sound of mind, could have a complete threat-based response to something as small as an email? There's just a danger that is flashed before their eyes, and there's this complete overreaction. And the thing is, all of this happened decades before that email. It's actually got nothing to do with the email. And you're reacting at full volume to whatever preset was programmed into your system. This is essentially the part that no one sees because it's not designed to be seen. What looks like your personality, your style under pressure, you go to move in conflict, the way you always seem to know exactly how a room is going to go before it does. That's the visible tip. Underneath it are layers that you essentially never signed up for. You never get a vote on those layers, and in most cases, never even knew that they were there until this now moment. Let me take you a layer deeper, and I find that this layer explains what actually shows up in leadership. As a child, you were carrying two needs, and they occasionally competed with one another. You either needed to belong, be it stay close, stay loved, stay safe in a relationship that essentially meant this is going to keep me alive. And you also needed to be authentic. And that means to be able to feel your feelings, whatever they were, at whatever given time, and being given the space to express them in an authentic way, not having to edit them. But most of the time, those two needs got along fine. But when they clashed, and for all of us, at some point they have clashed, there was only going to be one winner. Belonging beats authenticity every time. That's just a matter of fact. And belonging meant survival. Belonging meant you stay safe. to a child's nervous system, that is a non-negotiable. So if your anger, for example, threatened connection, your anger got suppressed. It got quietened down. If your sadness made your carer or someone close to you uncomfortable, that sadness learned to disappear. And you'd be able to hide things before anyone could see it. Keep in mind, you did not decide this. Think of it this way. No one sits a 5-year-old down and asks for consent to suppress the authenticity that wishes to be expressed. This is the trade that is made without you knowing. Your nervous system is making this trade because it wants to keep you safe. That is its primary job at that moment in time. And here's the part that I think a lot of people don't catch is this trade does not expire when you turn 18 or when you leave the house. It is programmed into your system. So it doesn't expire in the corner office. It doesn't change when you move into a different relationship. It doesn't change when you change jobs. It doesn't change when your income shifts. It still lives there. It doesn't change when you get to become a parent either. It essentially just changes clothes, and it becomes the executive that needs to deliver a hard truth to the team, but has to wrap it up in 3 layers of clothes to make it even softer or bearable. And the message just gets muffled, distorted, and so communication fails. And the child who learned that needing help meant that they became a burden becomes the founder who would much rather burn out and self-isolate and disconnect than raise their hand for help. So it's a completely different office, but it's the same 5-year-old that's making the deal. So this is where I think most capable people get genuinely stuck. And it's easy to hear this as criticism, but I just wanting to be precise in this. Understanding a pattern and changing a pattern are not the same things. It sounds like a similar idea, but it's a completely different operation. They don't ever happen in the same part of you. The part of you that can explain your childhood, name the attachment style, walk you through the triggers with total clarity. That part is articulate. That part has sound mind. It has almost no authority over the part of you that actually runs the pattern, that holds the charge, and repeats that mechanism in real time. That part sits lower, sits deeper, and doesn't typically use language for any of it. It doesn't take instructions, it doesn't read books, it doesn't digest the information from the latest podcast you've listened to. It takes experience and only experience. So that's the honest answer why you could sit in the same room with a therapist, with a coach, and you can nod and agree, oh, this makes a lot of sense. I completely understand that. I get this. I can see where this was lived. And you can go a week after that conversation, but you're still repeating the same behavior. It's because it was never a knowledge gap. It's not that you're missing information, it's that you're missing a new experience. So here's a way of feeling this instead of just hearing it. Imagine a smoke detector that got installed in a house where fire ends up taking place. Understandably, after that, the detector becomes quite sensitive, extremely sensitive. So sensitive that it goes off from steam in the shower, or you boiling the kettle, or from the toast becoming slightly too dark. And none of those things are dangerous in any way, shape, or form. So you can try and stand underneath this alarm detector and explain to it calmly and correctly that there is no fire, there is no danger. And you can be completely right. From a logical perspective, there's no harm, no foul, there's no reason to be concerned. But the alarm doesn't care because it was built to protect you from something that was real once. And it has no mechanism for being talked out of its job. That's its job. The only thing that can recalibrate a smoke sensor like this is time, with enough new evidence that will validate that it's safe and it's repeated enough that it is able to adjust that threshold. So it's no longer as sensitive. Your nervous system's threat protector, which is called neuroception, works exactly in the same way. It's not malfunctioning, it's just doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And this is based on precisely what it once needed to predict and protect you from. So explaining to it that the coast is clear was never going to reset it or adjust that baseline. So everything that we talked about this here sits directly on top of what we've been talking about today. You look at capacity depletion, you're looking at identity fusion with behavior, and how that leads to lesser or greater performance until you can't tell where the role ends. And think of it, you can have behavior running on autopilot the second real pressure ends up showing up. And all of this lives in a lived loop. And that loop sits on this foundation. You can optimize this loop all day, every day, with the best frameworks and strategies available. But if the baseline underneath it hasn't actually moved, the loop just resets back to the factory settings the next time you're under enough pressure. And so the cycle just repeats. And there's a reason why this pattern becomes stronger the more successful you become, and not weaker. And it seems paradoxical and completely backwards, if we're going to be honest. If you think about it, every single time you push through discomfort with sheer force, you override tiredness, you override doubt, you override the part of you that quietly wants to slow down. Your brain doesn't file that away as neutral. It ends up treating it as rehearsal or practice. So the real consequences are the more that you rehearse or override that feeling to get the result, the more efficient, automatic the circuit becomes. And it essentially stops needing your permission at all. You as the conscious person are just taken on a neural loop that is efficient and effective. And think of it like your dopamine bank account. Every time you override a genuine need, you need something in order to perform, that can be considered as a withdrawal from that account. And whether you are watching the balance or not, the system keeps a full ledger of all these transactions. And it doesn't forgive this balance or the debt because the quarter went well. And eventually you'll find that that balance is quietly running the show, even though on the outside it doesn't necessarily look like burnout or it looks like you are depleted. And you might not even consciously recognize that you're operating on empty because you've pushed through this so many times. And that's exactly why the high performers and leaders that I sit across the rooms with often have the deepest grooves of all. It's not because there's something uniquely wrong with them, it's just that they've got such a wide margin due to all those rehearsals, all the times they've had to push through, that threshold has adjusted so many times, well beyond a reasonable baseline. So if we bring it back, if regulation isn't the answer, if insight isn't the answer, then what is it? You cannot out-argue a pattern that you never built with words. You have to rebuild the baseline in the same way that it was originally built, through an experience, not through explanation. And it's slower than we would typically like. It's not just mental, it's also physical. And you repeat this often enough and safely enough, the system will naturally return back to baseline. And it's the same way that a smoke detector recalibrates once enough smoke-free days have quietly passed over time. And that's the actual work. It's not managing the symptom harder. It's not finding one more insight to validate why you're doing it this specific way. It's meeting the architecture underneath that conscious layer directly, giving it a genuine new experience to build from. Remember, we come back to that piece of belonging and authenticity. And what you're doing is you're teaching yourself a new way to belong and authentically express yourself. And recognize that you were never asked for consent for the architecture that made you who you are today and how you function today. Become a person where your success and your authentic expression feels safe and allows you to feel like you belong in the life that you're currently living. And if this spoke to you today, I invite you to take a moment and consider that 5-year-old version of you that's running the show in the background, the one that's making these decisions without you knowing. And you might be so consciously frustrated with the behaviors and the habits that have formed, but recognize where they're coming from. They're just wanting you to stay safe. This part of you just wants you to be safe, just wants you to belong. Doesn't want to be kicked out of that environment. Recognize that. That's step number 1. Step number 2, I invite you to do the capacity assessment. That's on my website, frequencycoaching.com/assessment, link below as well. And see where you're actually leaking energy and capacity. And this ties deeply into, this is the underlying behavior that's preventing me from being more regulated, being more present, being more strategic, being more impactful, and performing at my highest level sustainably. So thank you for taking the time to dive into yourself. And as always, you have the ability to make the shift. See you in the next one. Cheers.